When the Portuguese arrived in Japan in 1543, they encountered a country embroiled in civil war. Out of this chaos, one samurai warrior would emerge. He would create a regime so strong it endured for over 250 years. Witnesses to this world, both Western observers and Japanese, wrote of these changing times. Theirs is a story of flowering culture, of poetic ritual, and of rigid power struggles. It is the saga of opening trade with Europe and then closing its doors to the West. These are the memoirs of Japan's secret empire.
On the 25th day of the 8th month of the year of the water and the hair, there appeared off our western shore a big ship. No one knew whence it had come.
As a Buddhist monk later recounted, samurai guards were quickly dispatched to warn their master. There were strangers on board these ships, unlike anyone the Japanese had ever seen. The local warlord, called a daimyo, summoned these strangers, the first Europeans to ever set foot on Japanese shores. It was the year 1543. When these Portuguese merchants arrived, the daimyo was intrigued by their peculiar, unknown weapons.
The Japanese always like novel things, new things, fads, so to speak. And so they were very, very interested in the Europeans.
After he watched the Portuguese shoot down a duck, the daimyo purchased 2 guns and put his swordsmith to work making copies. Then he asked for shooting lessons. These first Europeans, their guns and their religion, would have unforeseeable consequences. In this same year, a boy was born to a daimyo family. He would be known as Tokugawa Ieyasu. His destiny would be to change Japan forever. As an elite member of the samurai class, the boy inherited a world of tradition, a feudal realm of samurai warriors who ruled by birthright and sword. The son of a daimyo lord, Ieyasu would soon have to give up children's games for the politics of war. When Ieyasu was still a child, the ruling daimyo demanded that Ieyasu's father send the young boy to him as a hostage, insurance that all orders would be obeyed. He would grow up a hostage, his life captive to the turmoil of civil war.
The whole of Japan was involved in wars. Treachery was rampant and nobody trusted his neighbor. They would enter into league with one faction and then desert it for another, as the winds of fortune blew.
João Rodrigues, an eyewitness to these perilous times, was one of the first Portuguese to arrive in Japan. The Japanese, João Rodrigues observed, regarded the Europeans with equal fascination.
They greatly wondered at our big and long noses, thick beards, and red or fair hair, and considered all these things as so many defects.
They called them the Southern Barbarians. Most of the Japanese take a bath every day, whereas Europeans, I'm afraid in those days, went for months and months and months without taking a bath.
In little more than 50 years, these missionaries established over 200 Catholic churches, primarily in southern Japan, and converted up to 250,000 Japanese.
When a Japanese lord or Japanese daimyo changed his religion, he would bring pressure on his people because he had absolute power of life and death on the people below him.
To endure the rigors of never-ending training, to remain clear-minded in the face of grave danger, to face death matter-of-factly, this is the art of kendo, the way of the sword. Master swordsmen taught young samurai the skills of sword fighting and the traditions of a samurai code of honor. This was the education the young Ieyasu would receive, even as a hostage. The young hostage, Tokugawa Ieyasu, would learn what it meant to be a samurai. At age 15, Ieyasu entered manhood and earned the right to carry the two swords of the samurai.
The sword was the symbol of the samurai class. Only the samurai were authorized to carry two swords, a large one and a small one. The samurai, with these two swords, ruled over the farmer and the merchant.
You're born into being a samurai, it's a responsibility. Amongst the responsibilities of being a samurai was always carrying one's sword to use to enact justice. If somebody were rude to you, it was your duty to kill them. No samurai would walk around outside without a sword. And if they were caught without a sword, they could be punished for not upholding their duty.
While the samurai class comprised less than 10% of the population, their presence loomed larger than life. Even the missionaries wrote as if the samurai were the whole of society. It was not only the men who swore to uphold this ideal. Samurai women were also trained to protect their family. The samurai defended his home and family, but his true glory came on the battlefield, defending his lord against enemies. The samurai dressed carefully for combat. The finely stitched fabric and leather appeared elegant, even fragile. Unseen were the tightly woven plates of steel. Much like his protective armor, a warrior's refined appearance concealed his impenetrable inner core. This ethic, preserved in writings of the samurai, would prepare the warrior to meet life and death with honor.
Samurai would wash himself with cold water every morning, scent the shaven top of his head and hair with incense to make himself presentable. He was ready to be killed in battle at any moment.
For samurai, as important as knowing how to kill was knowing how and when to die. Seppuku, or harikiri, is the ritual of suicide as practiced by samurai.
A samurai warrior carried two swords on his hip, a long one and a short one. The short sword was for cutting open his abdomen. Why would a samurai cut open his abdomen? Well, Japanese, especially samurai, believed that the heart was in the belly. They believed that whether their heart was pure or impure would be revealed when they disemboweled themselves.
From the death poem to the final thrust of the dagger, seppuku is a ceremonial ritual of suicide ensuring an honorable death. The samurai, dressed in the customary white kimono, solemnly and with great dignity, mounted a raised platform.
Then, in a loud voice, he told them to watch him carefully as he cut himself open. He seated himself and wrote his will slowly and calmly, asking his lord to look after his son and family, for he was going to die on account of his honor. He bade farewell, and then in front of them all, he fearlessly cut his belly. And so, he died.
For Tokugawa Ieyasu, patient strategizing would become his most powerful weapon. He was now of age, 18 years old and married with 2 children, but he was still a hostage of the ruling daimyo warlord. As time passed, Ieyasu strengthened his skills as a warrior, fighting alongside his daimyo master. When his master was killed in battle, Ieyasu was finally free to determine his own destiny. Ieyasu reclaimed his title as an independent lord, a daimyo. He returned to his family estate. He could now fight on his own terms, for his own people.
I fought against my enemies, solely in order that I might take my revenge on my father's adversaries. Because I was convinced of the rightness of my intention to help the people and bring peace to the land.
The years of captivity had honed his discipline. According to his samurai training, he now carefully plotted his strategy. In a crucial move, Ieyasu allied himself with the man who killed his daimyo master, Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga had become the most powerful warlord in Japan, feared and ruthless.
Nobunaga was the first to begin cutting through the thick forest of wars and discord in Japan. He subdued about half the country, and fear of him made the remaining part ready to obey him in anything.
In the Battle of Nagashino, Nobunaga armed 3,000 of his foot soldiers, 3 ranks deep. As 10,000 enemy warriors charged, Nobunaga's musketeers fired in succession, decimating the opposing army.
Nobunaga's innovations in the use of firearms completely changes the face of samurai warfare. The old idea was where you would have 2 samurai meet on the field of battle. They would shout out their names and their lineages, where they were from. Sometimes one would ride out in front of all these troops and challenge someone to come and defeat him. So it was very manly. It was imbued with the ideal of valor. Now you have faceless ranks of samurai shooting other faceless ranks of samurai.
Nobunaga continued to amass power until one night treachery within his inner circle caught him off guard.
Some say he cut his belly, while others believe that he set fire to the palace and perished in the flames. What we do know, however, is that of this man, who made everyone tremble not only at the sound of his voice, but at the mention of his name, there did not remain even a small hair which was not reduced to dust and ashes.
As the flames burned, Nobunaga's loyal general Toyotomi Hideyoshi seized the moment.
Hideyoshi immediately springs into action, murdering the murderer of his own lord, which then gives him the right, in essence, to claim leadership of Nobunaga's vast coalition of armies.
Ieyasu watched from a distance. Would he subordinate himself to Hideyoshi's command? Or was it time to fight for control? Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. These were the men who would bring an end to the brutal civil wars. They would go down in history as the unifiers.
There's a story in Japanese that explains the character of the 3 unifiers. And Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Ieyasu are watching a cuckoo bird waiting for it to sing, but the bird doesn't sing. And Nobunaga says, "Little bird, if you don't sing, I will kill you." And Hideyoshi says, "Little bird, if you don't sing, I'll make you sing." And Ieyasu says, "Little bird, if you don't sing, I'll wait for you to sing." And Ieyasu is a patient strategist who will wait for things to go his way, and then he'll act.
After Nobunaga's death, Ieyasu and Hideyoshi faced off in a measured game of strategy, each in his own way trying to outsmart the other.
As a military leader, Ieyasu was a courageous man who never hesitated in battle. However, though he was brave, he was also cautious. One famous story: Ieyasu was known as an excellent horseman. One day he and his troops had to cross a very narrow bridge over a raging river. Everyone was watching to see how the great Ieyasu would ride his horse over this dangerous bridge. To his men's surprise, Ieyasu dismounted, took the horse's reins in his hands, and carefully led the horse over the bridge to the other side of the river. That's how vigilant he was. I believe this kind of caution helped him to be victorious in battle.
While Ieyasu practiced restraint and careful strategizing, Hideyoshi acted quickly and decisively. Hideyoshi was from peasant stock. The son of a lowly foot soldier, he worked his way up through the ranks. Hideyoshi became known as a brilliant general, and he held the same grand vision of himself.
When my mother conceived me, she was given a miraculous omen. On the very night that I was born, the room was suddenly aglow with sunlight, thus changing night to day. Finally, they divined, the child whose birth was attended by these miracles was destined to become a man of unusual attainments. This prediction is fulfilled in me.
Shortly after Hideyoshi took control, Ieyasu challenged him. But Ieyasu soon realized there was more to be gained as Hideyoshi's ally than as his enemy. Hideyoshi rewarded Ieyasu for his loyalty with a vast domain of land and ordered him to make his headquarters in the remote fishing village of Edo, 300 miles east of Hideyoshi's castle in Osaka. Some might have thought the gift an insult. But in Edo, the village that would later become Tokyo, Ieyasu busied his troops building a massive 5-story castle fortification. Within the walls of the city of Osaka, Hideyoshi was consumed with fortifying his own castle. Reputed to be the most impregnable fortress of its time, it was also one of the most ostentatious. Osaka Castle had a strategic location, close to the emperor's palace in nearby Kyoto. For centuries, the emperor had remained a ruler in name only, ignored by those who truly held power.
It is only the court which can appoint the shogun. That's why all the warlords are aiming for Kyoto. You have to get the emperor to recognize that you're the most powerful of all of the combatants on the field of battle.
Hideyoshi curried the emperor's favor, inviting him to no plays and musical performances. But the emperor would not grant this warrior of peasant stock the title of shogun. Ieyasu never relinquished his desire for power. He offered the emperor more than invitations. He arranged the marriage of one of his granddaughters to the emperor's son.
All of the lords in Japan used family to cement political alliances. You would marry off daughters or marry off sons.
Hideyoshi failed to produce a male heir. Finally, he adopted a nephew and groomed him as his successor. Then, at 60 years of age, Hideyoshi finally fathered a son of his own. He called him Hideyori, and he was the jewel of his life. Hideyoshi's thoughts now turned to the safety and survival of his young son. As Hideyoshi obsessed over his own son, his adopted son, now an adult, was in peril.
It's clear that by the end of his life, Hideyoshi became increasingly cruel, if not sadistic. He ordered this adult male who had been his heir to commit suicide.
Hideyoshi then ordered his adopted son's entire family put to death. Soon after, Hideyoshi's health began to fail. Hideyoshi then called Ieyasu and 4 of the most powerful daimyo to his deathbed. He appointed them legal protectors of his 5-year-old son, Hideyori, his heir and the future ruler of Japan. Ieyasu pledged to protect the boy with his own life, a pledge that would become very difficult to keep. Ieyasu was on guard. Those daimyo who feared his growing power began to plot against him. Ieyasu's territory now extended throughout most of Japan. He was determined to maintain his holdings and expand his base of power.
One of Ieyasu's nicknames is the Old Badger, and it reflects his craftiness as well as his famed ability to wait. And he waits until after Hideyoshi is dead, until he has a clear preponderance of power, and then makes his move to become the dominant military leader in Japan.
Ieyasu mobilized his troops. He sent one division to Ogaki Castle, where his enemies were gathering. As the battle wore on, heads of slain warriors were brought to the castle to be prepared for the ritual presentation to the victor. It was believed that even in death, the samurai should be viewed as a worthy opponent. Victorious at Ogaki Castle, Ieyasu's troops now pursued the rebellious daimyo and their armies. They faced off in a narrow valley just west of the village of Sekigahara. This would be the battle that changed the course of Japanese history. Ieyasu set up his command post atop a hill overlooking the valley, waiting through the night for the rest of his armies to arrive. Ieyasu was outnumbered, with only 50,000 troops challenging his enemy's 80,000. He waited for his son to arrive with reinforcements, but at 8 in the morning, the fog suddenly lifted, and the 2 opposing armies found themselves within striking distance. Ieyasu could wait no more. Rallying his troops, it was said he sent them forward with his famous battle cry.
There are only 2 ways to come back from the battlefield. With the head of an enemy, or without your own.
Ieyasu watched as his troops faced what seemed insurmountable odds. Then, suddenly, the tide turned. Several enemy daimyo and their armies, convinced of Ieyasu's ultimate victory, defected and joined Ieyasu's forces. By 2 p.m., Ieyasu's troops had defeated the rebellious army.
Tokugawa's victory at Sekigahara brought an end to the warring states and signaled the beginning of a new era. That's the significance of the Battle of Sekigahara.
In recognition of Ieyasu's power, the emperor awarded him the title of shogun. Tokugawa Ieyasu now had the authority to rule Japan in all military matters. He ruled unchallenged. Tokugawa Ieyasu tolerated no dissent. He expelled many of the foreign missionaries. He even ordered all Christian activity among the Japanese halted. But still he faced the only true threat to his power, the young Hideyori.
By the time he reaches adulthood, Hideyori can no longer be ignored by Ieyasu. He's a threat simply because he exists. He is the legitimate heir of Hideyoshi. Ieyasu is supposed to be supporting him until he becomes an adult, and he poses an intrinsic threat to the legitimacy of the Tokugawa shogunate.
Ieyasu came to but one conclusion. He could no longer honor his pledge to a dead ally to protect his son. Ieyasu decided to go into battle once more. In the winter of 1614, Ieyasu accused Hideyori of subversion and ordered his troops to advance against Osaka Castle. Hideyori's supporters, nearly 100,000, held strong. Ieyasu retaliated with a devious plan. He sent a woman samurai to negotiate a truce with Hideyori's mother. Ieyasu offered a safe haven for Hideyori's garrison if in return he agreed not to mount further rebellion against Ieyasu's rule. To prove his intentions, Ieyasu signed the pledge in blood. Hideyori's mother convinced her son to accept the offer. Ieyasu's ploy had worked.
As soon as the fighting stopped, Ieyasu began to fill in the moats of Osaka Castle, the deep moats. And the people in the Osaka Castle protested a lot. That was not in the agreement. But that didn't matter. They filled in the moats. And once the moats were filled in, then Ieyasu's troops would storm into the castle. And there was a dreadful slaughter.
Thousands of defeated soldiers, women, and children fled the castle compound. Ieyasu's army set the castle on fire. As the flames raged around him, Hideyori refused to surrender and was left with no other option. He committed seppuku.
There's one big problem with killing Hideyori, however, and that's that Ieyasu was supposed to be his supporter. I mean, it's a very realistic, cold-blooded strategy, but he wanted to establish a dynasty that would last through the ages. There is reason to believe that Ieyasu genuinely regretted having to kill the son of his former lord. Ieyasu is said to have paid penance by writing the name of the Buddha 10,000 times on scrolls of parchment.
Tokugawa Ieyasu had wiped out the last threats to his power, or so it seemed. But not everyone was under his control. There were the Western traders who he valued but mistrusted, and the Christians who he considered a threat. Tokugawa Ieyasu had won the wars. His struggle to control the future of Japan had just begun. He was a strong leader and had brought peace to the war-torn nation. Yet foreign dangers and internal unrest remained a threat. Rescued from the sea and imprisoned, William Adams, the first Englishman in Japan, had good reason for concern. It was the year 1600, and Portuguese Catholics had long held a monopoly on trade in Japan. The most powerful warlord in Japan, Tokugawa Ieyasu, commanded Adams to his castle. Rather than ordering his execution, he wanted to know more about this stranger. The summons was highly unusual, as only the highest-ranking officials were ever received by the great man himself. As the meeting came to an end, Adams dared to make a parting request on behalf of his Dutch employers.
I desired that we might have trade with your country, the same as the Portugals and Spaniards.
To Ieyasu, this was welcome news. To avoid those he considered a threat to his own authority, Ieyasu wanted his own fleet of trading ships. Adams had the skills he needed. Ieyasu asked him to build 2 ships capable of navigating the open seas.
They were built with Japanese workers, of course, under his supervision. And then afterwards they sailed to Mexico, and they sailed back quite safely.
Ieyasu now had the leverage he desired. When the Catholic missionaries continued to gain converts and create problems, he expelled them. Ieyasu still wanted to trade with the West, but on his own terms. And Adams negotiated especially favorable terms for the growing Dutch East India Company. For Ieyasu, unsettling foreign influences could jeopardize the peace he worked so hard to forge. Biggest challenge would be to maintain control of the 260 fiercely independent warlords and their formidable samurai armies.
What made Ieyasu superior as a leader was that he surrounded himself with capable people who believed in him.
Peace would not be secured by leadership alone. Ieyasu had to curb the power of the daimyo, the feudal lords. Ieyasu allowed the daimyo to rule their own domains, but he prohibited them from doing anything that might enhance their power or status relative to each other. In Tokugawa, Japan, a daimyo was restricted to only one castle, and to enlarge it, he had to receive permission. A new ship? Ask the shogun. Arrange a new alliance through marriage. Only if the shogun approved. Ieyasu would maintain the peace through this ordered control, and it extended through all levels of society. The Japan that Ieyasu fashioned was built on the ancient teachings of Confucianism. Obey the traditions of hierarchy and respect authority. A Japan in keeping with the samurai traditions. All samurai were members of the elite class, whether he be a daimyo warlord or a lowly foot soldier. Next in line were the farmers, then the artisans. At the very bottom were the tradesmen, considered the parasites of society. The Tokugawa shogunate would issue many rules to control and maintain the rigid class structure, from what you could eat to what you must wear. The rules and regulations kept everyone in their place, but for the daimyo at least, there were still ways to earn special privileges. Ieyasu decreed that the lords must help build his castle and the surrounding city of Edo. The construction became a grand competition, as each daimyo vied for the shogun's favor. Soon they transformed the small castle and backwater village of Edo into a magnificent domain, the city later known as Tokyo. Those daimyo who had gained most favor lived closest to the castle and were granted more audiences with the great ruler himself. The great ruler had realized his vision. All of Japan was under his control. At 72, he was still remarkably vigorous. Then, on one of his regular hawking expeditions, he fell seriously ill. As he lay dying, he planned the details of his funeral. It would be a simple ceremony. His ashes taken to the top of a mountain overlooking the land where he so often went with his hawks. Here, he felt, his spirit could soar over his beloved land, holding the realm together. Ieyasu had carefully forged his well-ordered society. He would not leave the future of Japan to whim. He called his family to his side.
He told his children and grandchildren who were gathered around, "Because you are my descendants, you will become shogun. As shogun, it is important that you rule the country for the benefit of the people, or you will be punished by heaven. As shogun, you must govern for the good of the country. This world does not belong to the Tokugawas, and cannot be ruled just to satisfy your whims."